All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Inside In Tennis Podcast, part of the Believe Network. A lot of great content on Believe, and we have another episode here, podcast that is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your shows. We're diving into the world of pro tennis. It's been a long time coming, catching up with this person. Really just traveling all over the world, kind of a nomad right now, but Abigail Johnson back again. Welcome back to the show, Abigail.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. I don't know where I am right now. My body doesn't know what I'm doing to it with the toing and froing. It's been Australia, England, and the USA so far this year, and we're still in January at the time of recording, so who knows where life takes us next.
Yeah, we're glad you're here at Tennis Channel now, and we've had, you've worked for BBC and Tennis Australia. Although I will say, and we were talking a little bit before, you've made a couple of these trips to Santa Monica. I don't think you're a tourist anymore. So this is probably the last time you can do the touristy stuff.
No, for sure. I said at the end of last year, I kind of feel like a part-time local. I do feel like a part-time local. I was very fortunate to come out here for the first time in February of last year. Saw 2 full days of rain, which is very rare, so I'm convinced I brought that with me. But from July, I've been back pretty regularly. So yeah, I get off the plane and I'm very comfortable with where I am, and it feels like a second home now. So very glad to be here.
You made me think of something right there. Does it feel, I know we can't put ourselves in their shoes, but does it kind of give you a different appreciation for what tennis players go through? Like tournament, travel, off the plane, let's go, next gig?
100%. I was saying this to a couple of the players in Melbourne because, I've got to know a lot of the players well on a personal level with some of the lower level events I've worked at over the years and even now. And they've been saying to me, you're like one of us now. This is the life we live. And it's wild to me. I touched down in Brisbane at the end of December. I got on a plane to go out for the new tennis season on Boxing Day. So Christmas ended like slam. That's done. Quick as a flash. And I land in Australia, and the jet lag really hit me this time. The last couple of years, and I did Adelaide in 2023 and Brisbane in 2024, I thought I'd cracked it. Wrecked myself in terms of waiting until the last possible moment to sleep so that I would sleep on Australian time and try and bridge the gap a little bit. And I did the same thing this time, but sometimes there's just no rhyme or reason to the jet lag. And because I kept myself up, when I only managed to sleep for 5 hours on the first night, it absolutely knocked me. And I think I took probably the majority of Brisbane actually to get over the jet lag. And I was saying to the players, if that had happened to you and you had to play a tournament, I don't know how you do it. It's hard to focus, when you're doing commentary, but with the physicality of that, brutal.
Yeah, it's like doing laundry tough. Maybe saving a break point with your pay on the line would be a little different. But I do think there's different rhyme or reason. You never really know. You hear a lot of it, right, where players just want to work out or get a hit in or just some sort of exercise. That's kind of how I've always approached it. You might as well just struggle through a workout and try to get through it to get active, but there's no rhyme or reason.
No, not at all. I always appreciate as well just the brutality of the long haul for athletes. You want an aisle seat if you're not flying business, right? You need that aisle seat to get up and stretch your legs and keep the blood flowing. The amount of long journeys I've done now has really emphasized the physical side of being on a flight for that length of time. So I've moved actually from window seat, which was my go-to, to I always want an aisle seat now. Always.
I've been team aisle for a long time. I'm welcoming more people to the team, I think, as we all get older. But, Abigail, we've kind of talked about it before, but you're pretty entrenched in the game now, whether it's calling matches, hosting events, radio or TV broadcasts, various things. And I think you even mixed in some coaching in there, if I have that right. But
A little bit.
a little bit. But I ask you, too, a lot of people would love to be in your shoes and have the same question. Do you have a role that you enjoy the most? Do you try to take different roles to balance it out? How do you approach what you do and maybe what you like to do the most?
My starting point is always the fact that I love the sport of tennis. And I always say this to people, it went that way round. I didn't come across tennis because I was a broadcaster, which is the main body of my work now. And because I enjoyed broadcasting, I found broadcasting and commentary and hosting and all of this stuff because of my love of tennis. So when it comes to the body of my work, I do have a passion for being on the mic and using the ability to speak, and that I guess, skill set that I have, but my first love is still tennis. And if I can do anything to keep myself within the sport, I would gravitate to that rather than broadcasting for another sport. Like tennis is what I know now because I've just worked in it at all levels, juniors, ITFs, challengers, main tour, grand slams. I just soak myself in it all the time. So and the more time you spend within it, the more passion it gives for you. And my passion very much is still driven towards I guess, the lower rungs of the
Yeah.
ladder and the areas of the sport that I feel just don't get as much attention. COVID was a massive time in terms of channeling my attention in that direction because I spent so much time covering British domestic events, and I'd been involved on a social media front actually on ITFs leading up to that time because I was just trying to get more experience and teach myself more about the game and give that more of a profile. And you make personal connections when you're at those events as well, and you start to see things through the player's eyes and just get more understanding about the level that's there that's not always appreciated on a
Right.
wider scale. And one of my favorite things now is when I get to go to those grand slams, which is such a privilege, whether I'm doing radio or TV or whether I'm on court with the mic, seeing the storylines that you followed at those other events come through. I was in a bus in a car with Joao Fonseca and his coaches in June. I sat in the back with
Yeah.
Joao just chatting about his career and life,
Yeah.
and we did 2 journeys together actually in the same day, and they remember that. We're
Yeah.
talking in Melbourne, in the player dining and behind the scenes. His coach Guillaume Teixeira, great guy, so generous with his time, and Kim Birrell. I mean, a handful of months before she made her run to the quarterfinals of Brisbane and then qualified for the Australian Open, I was traveling with a British player and we were on the practice courts in Bratislava trying to work out how to turn the lights on because they wouldn't turn on and we needed to maximize our 30 minutes of the practice session. So in such a short space of time to go from those venues to the spotlight, so special. I would not
Right.
enjoy those tournaments as much as I do if I hadn't been there for the rising action, as it were, leading up to that climax.
Yeah, we actually saw a power issue in Montpellier today too. So I mean,
Yes,
the lights kind
we
of seem to be an
did.
issue in the sport. But no, you bring up a good point too, and that's why the best. I mean, there's a lot of emotional moments in the sport, but the best feel good moments for a lot of people are when you qualify for the major, the life changing moment of getting through qualification, getting to the major, getting to whether it's your first or just the opportunity. But you did touch on something else, Abigail. It's these indoor events. You've covered Grand Slams, the height of the sport, but you're still active. We saw it last year, right? In the winter months, it's cold, it's freezing. You're back at the UK indoor. I know there's a lot of winter jackets inside, but what can you tell us about those events and what that opportunity means for players that are chasing something bigger?
Oh, it's massive, those building blocks. And you see with a lot of players coming up, and I was even talking about this on the mic today, calling the Talon Greek Sport match against Richard Gasquet. And what an effort from Gasquet to take that down the wire against a player who's so accomplished in the indoor conditions. He's only behind Yannick Sinner, Greek Sport, in terms of match wins indoors at tour level since the start of 2023. But when you're coming through the ranks, there's a lot more opportunity to play indoors, ITFs in particular, and then on the ATP Challenger Tour, there's still that playing opportunity. And it's particularly in Europe where the weather is not so good, you get really familiar with those indoor conditions and then you take the steps up and it does change a little bit going out into the sun and being on the clay and being on these hard courts and humidity and all of that kind of thing. So you really want to maximize the indoor conditions while you can. You don't always get a ball that's playing in such a consistent way that allows you to develop the groundwork of your game. So I think that's massive in terms of the events on the ITF circuit. It's been great in the few years since COVID to see the UK coming through with more of these events because it is huge in player development to be cost effective, to just take off a little bit of the strain that comes from being on the lower rungs of the tennis ladder. You're a little bit more comfortable because you're at home. You're not spending as much on travel. You're not spending as much on accommodation generally. And you do start to see some players that, go on to great things in a short space of time. I still remember Jacob Fernley at the back end of 2023. I have this vague
Yeah.
recollection, a vivid recollection, I would say, of being on the balcony at Scotstoun Tennis Centre in Glasgow and talking to him about his 13-match winning streak that he was on the ITF circuit. 12 months later, he's on the rocket
Yeah.
rise into the top
Yeah.
100, and it's just wild. But he
Yeah.
he started that rhythm at the opening levels of the sport.
Right.
That's where everyone has to start, whoever you are, however good a junior you've been, whether you've come out of college. So you're always going to see players at this event, at these events. And yeah, the big one for me will always be Marketa Vondrousova playing the W100 in Shrewsbury and then winning Wimbledon 8 months later. It just puts into perspective for all these players. And I know Vondrousova was a bit of a special case because she'd been at the top before and she was working her way back with injury. But what an opportunity of exposure to the level for other players. What an underlining of actually how fine the margins can be in terms of process to the top or back to the top.
Yeah.
And her opponent in that final, Ava Lees, just made round of the Australian Open as a lucky loser, and always great to see Ava. She's a lovely girl and has time for people and is a great online presence as well. I think she's built up quite a following for herself. It was great to see her run. So yeah, the personal connection that you get there as well and get to know the players on their way up is fantastic.
Yeah. Couple of things you said there. One, so it sounds like with the Vondrousova thing, you're saying that it might be good to have smaller events, have top players. Like maybe in Austin, Texas, it might be a good thing if it could elevate the event. Is that what you're saying?
That's a really smooth transition from you to a big talking point right now, which is I'll let you lay the story there in the background.
I had it on the note on things I wanted to discuss, but I figured this would be a perfect time to work it in. And we get how these things work, right? You sign up for events before your ranking, before things happen. Players could easily drop it off the schedule based on a successful event too. But the idea out there, and for those not up to speed, Madison Keys signed up for the WTA 250 event in Austin coming up very soon, and is not allowed to play now because they have a tour rule, and that was the bigger picture I wanted to talk about, Abigail. You're only allowed to have one top 10 player at these events. Jessica Pegula already signed up. So forget about, and I'm not even necessarily blaming Austin or anything like that, or it's a tour rule. The issue of critique, very fairly in my opinion, is why does this rule exist that a player is too good to be at a tennis tournament?
Well, this rule only came into effect, if I am correct, and I've tried to double check myself on this, at the beginning of last season. So it's still fairly new. I was refreshing myself on the rules because there are various things that relate to players within the top 30 at that level of event. It's not just limited to participation from players in the top 10. On the one hand, I understand the motivation for doing it a little bit. I think on the WTA side over the years, more than on the ATP side, those 250 events have become a bit crowded. I think generally because of lack of playing opportunities in comparison, from my observation, and they just tend to be a little bit more loaded, the fields, and then naturally it's a bit tougher for players to, I guess, make that transition from the higher level ITFs onto the WTA circuit because there aren't as many opportunities to play. I think Karolina Pliskova is a good example of being a player that got right to the top of the game through consistency across the board, just playing everything that she could and playing it decently, and that did include some 250s. So I think that was a bit of a talking point in terms of how she managed her ascent without winning the very biggest titles in the sport. But I don't think it was and this is me personally, right? I don't think it was a widespread enough issue to make a move like that, which is limiting for a certain group of players, definitely limiting for the fans who turn up to an event hoping and expecting to see certain names in the lineup. They're always going to be a draw and a bit of a ticket seller, the likes of.
And don't you think that, and I don't want to, I mean, maybe this is a suggestion, but the fact that she is American and this is an American tournament, like we have exceptions to rules in sports all across the board. I think that might hit a little harder, that this is an American who wants to play in front of American fans that isn't getting the opportunity to.
100%. And they do have that little asterisk in there, the WTA, with the rules saying if it's a home player. But I believe Jessica Pegula as also an American inside the top 10. And
Ranked
hey,
ahead by
good problem
one.
for the States to have because you've got
Right?
4
Yeah.
American women in the
Yeah.
top 10 right now.
Yeah.
So that is a good problem. But I don't think, my perspective, Mitch, I don't think it's a problem that needs to be on the table.
Mhm.
I think if you're having to make these kinds of decisions, it indicates that there's not enough playing opportunity. Surely
Yeah.
the first move is more tournaments rather than reduce the field from the current tournaments.
Yeah.
That's my outlier's perspective on that situation.
Certainly interesting. But, these smaller events, like you said, working the indoors are going to build character. You want to, grow the game at that level. You did bring up Fernley. I just have to say, I had him on the show last year when he was in the midst of his 3 challenger runs in a row. And I was like, so how many months ago were you in class? Like you were actually in a class a couple of months ago, and then you're playing Djokovic at Wimbledon center court. So just that was remarkable to hear, his ascent, which never happens. Like it was so sudden.
How good is his head? Like, he is
Yeah.
one of the calmest guys. Him in the singles and Henry Patton in the doubles are just exemplary in terms of management of themselves and facilitating the level that they put out on court. And if the Djokovic match was not enough example from Jacob Fernley, what about that first round against Kyrgios at the Australian Open this month? And yeah, it's an out of form Kyrgios, but he's still serving bombs at the beginning of that match, and he still has a raucous John Cain Arena behind him, which has got on top of so many players. I mean, he had Dominic Thiem down 2-0 on that court in the past. Liam Brody, I know, was really bothered by it when he played Nick there a handful of years ago. So for Jake to go out there and just execute the way that he did, I was so pleased for him and so impressed by him that even as he's now in this strange territory so quickly, the mindset is the same. Another thing that you could see when he was playing ITFs and when he was playing challengers, the standout match for me was against Paul Jupp on his way to the Nottingham Challenger title last summer. He had 7 match points, I believe, in the second set, lost that set, still came out strong to win the deciding set, Jubb having stayed in that match really well. So even though it's at a lower level, it's the qualities that are transferable and you are gonna work in your favor the higher up the rankings you climb.
Yeah, I was almost more impressed with the Arthur Cazot match where you had the French crowd that was probably not the most fair, I would say. It's safe
The
to say.
party court 6 with the bar.
But he handled that very well too. So props to him. And then you mentioned, I mean, Henry and Harry getting another doubles title. That was cool, obviously, to see. Great guys, but also it just shows you that in doubles, finding the partner and finding the right fit. There might not be a rhyme or reason. You might actually be, in a lot of cases like them, polar opposites in a lot of ways, but it just fits perfectly. What a tremendous story for that team to back up Wimbledon with another title.
Yeah, it's incredible because Harry Heliovara a handful of years ago had stopped tennis. He thought, having had a decent doubles career, that he'd achieved as much as he could have done, and giving it another chance just gave himself the opportunity to find Henry, because Henry had only really committed fully to the doubles in 2022 when himself and Julian Cash, who's now doing really well with Lloyd Glasspool, they had that phenomenal run of 10 challenger titles in the back end of one season. It was within 6, it was the challenger record, and they did it within half a year rather than a full year. It was just amazing. And Henry with the lefty serve, huge lefty serve, and his hand skills around the court. I think anyone's going to love him as a doubles partner, but he's such a laid back guy. And Harry Heliovara is so pumped all of the time. Just those two.
Yeah, that racket smash in mixed doubles at the U.S. Open last year is on my short list of biggest ones there. But it's good to see, though, because like those guys obviously are friends and they love playing together, and just having that chemistry could be the difference, like in a tight match. So happy to see that. We got more here with Abigail Johnson, though, on the Inside in Tennis podcast. I wanted to talk a little bit about your time in Australia, covering the Open yet again. Do you pinch yourself now? It's been a couple of years, but do you look back saying like it's kind of crazy that I'm getting used to covering it, like it's a stop on your calendar, one of the premier events in tennis?
Yeah, that really hit home for me a bit this year, because I was saying even to my mum, I think the day before I went back out, I said, can you believe this is the 4th time? Like, it feels like the first time was a handful of minutes ago, because that was not only was it my first time covering the Australian Open, it was my first really big trip. Like prior to that, I'd only flown to France, which is a hop across the
And that was
channel.
Nadal's, and that was the year Nadal won it. Was your first time?
Um, Australian Open.
Yeah.
Yes, it was
Wow.
magic because you had the home Grand Slam
That's
win for Ash
crazy.
Barty, and you
And
had Rafa Nadal doing what he was doing. I called,
crazy.
I think, part of pretty much every single one of his
Wow.
matches up until the semis because I was on AO radio, and my shifts just happened to coincide with his matches. I
Wow.
remember going that it was on my bucket list to call a Rafa Nadal match, and it was literally the first match I called when I arrived,
Wow.
which will stay with me forever because what a run that was for him. And also I think the access at the Australian Open is better than all the other slams, because to get to the bunker where I commentate from, whether it's for AO Radio or for BBC 5 Live as it was this year, you go through match call, you go halfway down the walk of champions, and then you have the door that takes you down into the bunker. So you see these players before they go out on court and after they come back on court. It really humanizes them. You see you just have a different perspective on them than you would if you were commentating from a distance, and you really do feel up close and personal with them and their stories, which I could feel that, and I know we've spoken about it before. I could feel that victory coming for Nadal, particularly from the quarterfinals against Shapovalov. Like, I don't even know if I can talk about this. I don't know if I've spoken about it publicly, but I felt there was a lot of weight in that result for him. Felt massive for him in terms of his self-belief and his ability to problem solve.
That's true though. That's a good point, because I mean, you can even look at this year. Like sometimes the matches early open it up when there's a lot of weight in these matches. Where I was just going to use Madison Keys for an example. It was the Rybakina match for me. I watched how that went, and I'm like, okay, like there's something here where you see something happen in a match early on the run, and you're like, let's just put a pin in that one, because that felt like bigger than just one win. It felt like a breakthrough on the road to something better.
Sure. And for me with Keys, it was Swiatek in the semis, because she saved match point as well, the manner in which she did that. And the Australian Open has a history with players in the women's draw saving match point on the way to the title. Nina, Angelique Kerber, Naomi Osaka, all in recent history. Caroline Wozniacki as well. But no, on that Shapovalov win, so Nadal wins that in 5, and I was like, wow, huge moment for Nadal. Think he's going to win the tournament from here. My co-commentator wasn't so convinced, so I was kind of thinking, oh, have I got a bit carried away with the emotion of the occasion? Have I read that correctly? And then someone that I knew who was working the event told me that Nadal had come through the tunnel and had just broken down in tears because of everything that match had taken out of him. I'm pretty sure cameras and stuff were turned off. I don't think that was ever broadcast or anything. But just this outpouring of emotion because of how much that particular result had taken from him. And that's something that I would only know from being there, just that confirmation of, okay, this feeling that I had, it was warranted, and it was real in terms of the magnitude of that particular victory for him. It really takes you to the heart of the stories being there for those moments.
Well, this year you had the chance to not only call matches, but interview some players as well. And you got to speak to some of the women that accomplished great things in the last couple of years, or maybe in one case, making their comeback. One of those women was Naomi Osaka. And I just wanted to ask you how, it didn't end right. Obviously, there was the injury. We hope she's okay. But how was her level? How was her attitude going into this tournament, where when she did play, and even in the entire run in Australia, she looked pretty good? This is a comeback that there are no guarantees on. But how would you gauge where Naomi's at mentally and physically?
Oh, it felt different. And I would say mentally a huge step up from last season. I remember calling her comeback match in Brisbane last year. And you don't forget how to play tennis. The essentials of her game, the clean strike of the ball, the way she imposes herself, that was all still there. But it's also consistency and different levels of opposition. I think Tamara Korpatsch was her first opponent that year, and then she went on to play maybe Pliskova, actually. I can't fully remember, but she lost that next match. It was a great gauging of where she was at to play Caroline Garcia for the second Australian Open in succession, because she'd been beaten quite nicely in the big moments by Garcia a year ago. And then different build up for Garcia as well, having taken a bit of time off at the end of last year, but mentally more fresh, Garcia. And again, she's got the groundwork of her game that's taken her to big things, 2022 most recently, and having come through with some world-class tennis, Garcia, in recent years. So that was brilliant from Osaka, but actually the match that I did the post-match interview with her for was when she played Karolina Muchova, and that was out on Kia Arena, so that was an interesting one. She'd never played on that court at the Australian Open. It was actually a new court after she last won the title in 2021, and just with where she's been ranked in the past, it's not a court that you would have expected her to be on with her status as a two-time former champion. There was consistently one day that was very heavy in terms of strength of matches at the Australian Open this year, and she just happened to fall on that day. Otherwise, that match with Karolina Muchova, that was an
It was insane. I mean, it was, and the draw itself, and the draw itself, right? Like some of the names, it shows you how important getting a seed is for someone getting your ranking up, because Garcia, Muchova, if she comes back, battles her way, and then it's Bencic, who is also on a comeback. I mean, that's a tough road to go through for anyone.
That's heavyweight, and it was impressive, the Muchova win, because for me, in terms of skill set and just her ability to pick up where she left off so quickly despite setbacks, Muchova's the most skilled player on the WTA
I'm a fan.
tour.
Like, it's great to watch.
Her shot making, her point construction, her tennis IQ, her vision, phenomenal. Love her and want to see much more of her, and I believe we will. She's top seed this week in Linz and still going at the time of speaking. And she played a knockout opening set. Like, she controlled it. Osaka came out really positive, but she was kept on the back foot. And this is where we talk mentally, because I feel like a few months ago, even, that would have got under Osaka's skin a little bit more. She focused on herself and she hung so tough. And at this point, Mitch, I can't remember the ins and outs of that match. I've watched a lot of tennis already this season.
Yeah.
But I remember Osaka winning a couple of rallies at the beginning of the third set that she just shouldn't have won against the Muchova construction and the way Muchova was still competing. Also, sitting courtside, that was a very windy match, and that was something that I felt tilted it in Muchova's favor at the beginning, because she can just control those conditions a little bit more. Wind did drop midway through the match, which I think helped Osaka, but she was still out there engaging point by point and problem solving, and just a couple of those big points that she won at the beginning of the third set, you can really feel momentum swinging. And I thought, okay, well, let's plan our questions for Naomi Osaka, because it feels like that time. So that helped me out a little bit, actually, with who I was going to be talking to at the end of the match. For a while, it looked really uncertain. But yeah, corner turn for Osaka, I felt.
It's got to be tough, like for any athlete on the comeback trail, but someone so accomplished, a bona fide champion like herself, to have to pick the pieces back up, knowing that you might never get back to the very top of your level, but you can still be very good. I understand that it's a unique situation that only a few have to ask, only the great champions do, which also, and I don't know if it's a serious thing or if it's just a motivational tool, but when she says, look, I'm not going to stay around if I'm not near the top of the game, I understand the rationale with that, because they have different standards than, I'd say, the rest of us, than the rest of the pro tennis players.
But she also has more to walk away to now, Osaka, which will help with that. What is a bit of a relieving mentality, because she put so much pressure on herself before she became a mother. I think she had a documentary series where she spoke about it quite bluntly, just in terms of the expectations of achievement she had for herself. And this was a woman who's in her early 20s, a four-time Grand Slam champion, wasn't satisfied with that. The focus has very much shifted, and she knows that she has something else to go to, at the same time as knowing that she has a level in her. I mean, she's not silly. She knows what she's accomplished before and what she's still capable of. So I think she's found that balance that she didn't have previously, and something that's very similar with herself and Madison Keys. And Keys spoke a lot at this year's Australian Open about the work she'd done on a mental side, therapy, just addressing root causes of issues for herself in the past. Both of these women have found acceptance of themselves with and without tennis results. They are more than a tennis player on the tennis court, and that
Mhm.
has provided the foundation for both of them. Keys for a phenomenal title and Osaka for a comeback trail. I wouldn't have been as sure maybe this time last year, but I really do think we're going to see more of Osaka if the body allows it. So both have found that secure resting place, I think.
Yeah, we want to see Osaka back at the top of the game, knowing the level of tennis she has to be a factor. And yeah, for Madison Keys, I just wanted to put a bow on Australia, thinking about it some more. It's funny, Abigail, that tennis recognizes, as they should, Grand Slam champions as the same. But I do think history is going to look back at this Keys run and think this was like if we were going to add more to Grand Slams, maybe this one, because the level of players you beat consistently. I was trying to go back and look. This was a murderer's row of champions that she just took out, and in a lot of cases, took out kind of handily.
Yes, it was all on her terms. That was the most impressive thing. I didn't feel, and look, I'm commentating and calling different matches. I didn't see a lot of her early
Mm.
wins. I heard that she was playing well. And actually, my comeback to that when someone told me that was that she always kind of crumbles at the end. Mentally, she's not there, which she then became to be there because of the work that she's done in
Mm.
recent weeks, which I didn't have any awareness of until the back end of the tournament. But yeah, I remember her coming through as a teenager, and many of us just took it for granted she will win Grand Slams because that natural strike and timing she has on her is breathtaking, and it's going to knock the majority of players off the court. Then as she progresses and the game evolves a little bit as well, you see that there is a little bit more required than what she has mentally and physically at that point, and the mentality totally the foundation. She just had such clarity in where it had gone wrong in the past and what she needed to do to change that. And the way she walked the talk was monumental. I would not have called myself picking Madison Keys over Aryna Sabalenka in the Australian Open final at the beginning of the tournament. It was something I was doing after the semi-finals, just
Yeah.
because of everything that was falling into place for Keys, the fact it was Sabalenka that she'd lost a devastating US Open semi-final to in 2023. She was talking so openly and vulnerably about how it had gone wrong there and how she couldn't let that happen again. I just thought she's not going to let it happen again. Sabalenka is a player who has at times struggled with jet lag coming through, Mitch.
Yeah,
Struggled
there it
with
is.
players who can match or beat her for pace because there aren't a lot of
Which
them.
isn't, yeah, which is very few. But
Exactly.
yes.
So she doesn't,
Yeah.
it's the exposure thing again. Sabalenka is so used to dictating. She has
Yeah.
not had a lot of situations like that where she's really being,
Right.
Swiatek can do it sometimes, Rebecca has done it on occasion, but it's not something that she's consistently having to deal with, and certainly not in an Australian Open final. I mean, this was a vastly different
It,
matchup to Zhang Qinwen last year.
it was, it was almost like, you're saying it perfectly. Keys playing it on her terms. It's like a old like Western gunfight where you just beat her to the draw. Keys had to, and she did beat her to the draw. That she was going for her shots and converting them. I mean, there was a time not too long ago before the emergence of Coco Gauff, Jessie Pegula's run, where pundits were saying the big three in women's tennis were Iga, Sabalenka, and Rybakina. And Keys
Right.
just took them all out to win her first major. So that's where I'm at, where it's like, not only do you win one, you win your first major, you go through who we have justifiably said are the best to do it. It's going to be remembered fondly by the historians.
Oh, it's one of, if not the strongest run to a Grand Slam title in the last decade. And off the top of my head, the only run I can think of that rivals it was Leylah Fernandez to get to the US Open
Yeah.
final in 2021. She took down Kerber in form, Osaka in form, and
She would have won
Sabalenka
it.
was
Yeah.
building in the semis. But exactly,
Yeah.
she didn't win it. So to actually go all the way to a title, that's going to take some beating from Keys.
Yeah. The other news that we have in the tennis world coming out this week is the unfortunate, update on the Novak Djokovic injury. Doesn't, not going to be playing the Davis Cup ties. We're not sure when we're going to see him again with the leg, hamstring, muscle situation. Doesn't appear to be completely debilitating, but you got to ask the question, right, Abigail? When are we going to see him again? Age and injury, even for someone that's been defying time for so long, can be a setback, and also poses the question, how will he manage his schedule going forward, given that his goals are the majors and he is on the back couple years of his career?
Schedule management is the key for Djokovic, and it has been for, I'm going to say, the last couple of seasons. I mean, he threw everything into winning that Olympic gold medal last season. I don't think it really left him anything in the tank to target anything else, because that was the physical and health-wise state that he was in going into that particular tournament. The discipline and focus to produce that level under such stakes, phenomenal in the truest sense of the word from Djokovic to go all the way in Paris the way he did without dropping a set. And it had to be that streamlined because of the condition that he was in. And so with the Grand Slams, if he wants a shot, he's got to be so careful, because we're talking a best of 5 set format now. And there are starting to be the questions of how realistic a goal that is. And I'm sure for him as well. And you always allow a little flexibility when you're discussing this when it concerns all-time greats, because the willpower that they possess and the history that they have to go off, and for Djokovic, that history was 10 titles at the Australian Open, that does things. It gives them a bit of an aura, and it gives them belief, something to lean into when the day-to-day situation is maybe not where you would want it to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, for Djokovic, it's tough because he's seen it with his 2 biggest rivals, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Time catches up to everyone.
And it's swift too. It's also like, in a lot of ways, most of the time you go from top to, okay, still near the top, to could happen in a flash where that's it. Done contending.
It was Nadal, okay? Instantaneous for Nadal. That season where he started to struggle physically. I mean, he'd won, I wish I knew the number off the top of my head, but he'd won all his Grand Slam matches that season when he had to pull out of the semifinals of Wimbledon 2023. 2022 or 2023? 2022.
Yeah.
Never played Wimbledon again. He went from being that Grand Slam dominator to literally never playing another match at the championships. And it only takes one thing. For Federer, it was leaning over a bath and feeling a twinge in his knee, and that was it. He never fully recovered from that injury. It can be that quick. And with Djokovic, it's just been warning signs because of the repetition. He's ill here, he's injured there, and naturally that crops up more when you're in your very late 30s. It is just the course of life. So that is what he's having to manage now. It's management for Djokovic. And what are his goals? It's got to be a 25th Grand Slam title. But it's a huge ask. And if anyone can do it, Novak Djokovic can do it. But it's a huge ask with where he is at right now, physically.
I think knowing that you can go the distance, knowing what it takes to go 7 matches in 14 days, best of 5, or 15 days now, depending on the tournament, I think that's part of it. There's very few people active that know what that's like. I mean, just to be honest, I mean, we know who the top 2 are, but he still has an advantage over a lot of these players. And we know that match reps might not mean the same to him. I'm trying to think of the positives of this, because you're right. It could happen suddenly. It could be, and as it was Nadal, right? It could be in great form. You could be looking good. All it takes is one little thing, and that could derail you. So time is precious. He's got to be smart. We know he will. We know the motivation's there. That's the one thing that I keep looking back on, Abigail. It's getting the 25th major, but also proving that you still got it with these young superstars, that these guys have emerged. I think in a weird way, that's what's keeping him in it and keeping him wanting to fight, is that he's got something to chase. If he didn't, I don't think we'd see him right now.
Right. So you're saying that the bigger motivation is the 25th Slam or living with Alcaraz and Sinner? Because I'm saying it's the 25th Slam.
The Slam is important, but what number does he need anymore? Like, I think him even getting to this point is because there are 2 credible threats that have beaten him in his most recent major matches that are motivating him to get to that 25th Slam. I just don't know that he'd still be even chasing 25 or 26, because he's got every record. He's got it all, you know? He's on a sale to be the greatest. So
I mean, these greats do take the numbers seriously, and although it's not open era, everyone does bring up that Margaret Court number of 24 Grand Slams. Serena had it. Pushing away and feeling the pressure. No, but honestly, think of how many Grand Slam finals Serena actually got to after coming back from pregnancy. Just didn't win them. And she said it was the pressure of trying to get across the line for that number 24. Why was 24 so important? Because there was a record of sorts where that was the target number.
It's
If she
also,
hadn't had that pressure, I think
yeah,
she'd have made it, and there and beyond, I think.
it's also the circle of life, the circle of sports when you have, time off, whether it's injury, motherhood, like time away from the top. The young generation doesn't fear you like your peers did when you were dominating. So it's this
Right?
weird thing where, and these guys break through. Djokovic was the same way. Didn't come in with the same fear of Federer that a lot of the players originally did. So I'm fascinated by what's next, but we have to understand that tennis moves so fast. It might not be long. But the way Sinner played on the hard courts, we'll see how he does on clay and on grass. But this is the clear apex on this surface. I mean, he's the alpha right now. There's no weaknesses for how he plays the game, and he's just so composed out there. That's what I kept coming back to during that run, is that he was so methodical, so composed, match in, match out.
Yeah, I said steady Sinner in response to that tournament from him. It wasn't that he was mind-blowing in any department, and you're going to be really impressed if you compare him now to where he was a couple of years ago, but it's been marginal gains for him every season in every department, particularly the serve, I think, and the forehand is much more proactive than it used to be, but he's getting the balance right in every section of his game, and that's what the best do.
They do.
He's strong enough and balanced enough to take advantage of what was a poor performance by his standards from Alexander Zverev in the final. It was not a jaw-dropping performance from Jannik Sinner, but it was deeply impressive in its consistency and presence where he needed to be, and that was the big takeaway from that run.
So a couple more things here with Abigail Johnson on the Inside in Tennis podcast. I wanted to ask you before we head out. This has been obviously another lovely chat here. As we look ahead and as we kind of discuss some things, quickly, who do you think could be the next breakout stars in the major scene? We got 3 majors left. So if you had to name some players, maybe breakout stars isn't the way to go. I'll say players that could be following that Madison Keys route to making a deep run, getting to a final, getting to a title. That haven't had it happen before.
Oh no, I wish I'd thought about this before. I'm good with predictions when we're deep into a tournament and I have a lot of data from the tournament and performances.
I'm wrong all the time. So, and I know how hard it is for the men because it's more consolidated at the top.
Right.
So it would be hard to see a first-time slam champ, much harder, I would say.
I wouldn't be calling a first-time Grand Slam champion the men's side for the rest of the year, not myself.
Right.
The women's side is always more of an opportunity, but at the same time, in terms of title runs, I expect Sabalenka to win one more slam minimum. I could see her she could take any of the next 3 that she wanted to. She's shown her consistency across the board, but I would say that Wimbledon and the US Open are the particular big shots for her, and that she's going to take some beating in both. Although Keys will like her chances of a strong US Open run now, given that she's mentally more free and has performed at that event in the past, including as recently as 2023. Oh, in terms of coming through, Mukova can do it. Karolina Mukova can do it. She just needs the discipline to produce match in and match out, because the forehand can get away from her. I think she can get loose on that side and it can cost her. Who was it that she lost to at the US? Was it Jessica Pegula in the end?
Yeah, and she was up a set and a break in that match.
Exactly. And then it got loose. So and that can happen with the more, I guess, naturally gifted players on the circuit that have a lot going on in their games. It can just fall away sometimes. If she has the discipline, she's Grand Slam winning material, no questions asked. So I'd say, and I don't know if that's cheating a little bit, because obviously she's made semis before, so it's not like it would be a breakout run, but she can make a final and she can win a trophy, I would say. So I think that's a good shout for the women.
Yeah, I'm never going to pick against Iga on clay at Roland Garros, but she was in a final with her and took her to 3 tough sets. So I think Roland Garros, a healthy run, that's a good one. I'd also like to see Mira Andreeva. What's the next step with her? I think working with Conchita Martinez is good. That'd be the other one I'd star, because that breakthrough seems like it's going to happen. So we'll have to see.
She just needs to manage. She can get blown away still. Not as much as before, but if someone can overpower her, that can still end a little more quickly for her, I would say. So clay is actually more of an opportunity because it just slows down the pace of play that little bit more, and she knows how to play on the clay already. So I think, yeah, she is a good shout. Probably Mitch, if you came back to me in a few hours and I'd had a deeper look at it, I could come with a couple more names for you here. But I don't want to pile on the hype, but Joao Fonseca is so serious. I think I'm not calling him to go something like semis or final or whatever, but I think he has an aura about him right now, an acceptance of his own level, a knowledge of his own level that you saw when he played and beat Rublev in the first round. And how telling is that so many people were picking him to win his first ever full best of 5 set match against a guy who's made 10 Grand Slam quarterfinals.
Yeah.
Volumes as to
the odds were set really close. Like, he has got the respect of that. Like, people were on the train. That's a lot of pressure too.
Sure.
This generation of this next gen, we saw it with Mickelson, Lerner, like, they're coming, and they're not going to be as tentative maybe as the past. So that's a good one. Also good to get the South American crowds involved. And
for sure, I was privileged to have a media pass to go in and watch the opening stages of his match with Lorenzo Sonego. I got there before the players had even walked out on court. This was on 1573 Arena. The queues at every gate were snaking back along the grounds. Everyone, and the Brazilians were already in there, good for them, but everyone wanted in on that match. And I saw a lot of people trying to take him down, actually, for the fact that he lost that match. And I'd been on the call, actually. He played Sonego and beat him in Bucharest last year. But, to go out from being on the streak he was on with all the eyes on him, to play and win the way he did against Rublev, to go out against a very capable and experienced competitor in Sonego and go down the wire 5 sets, I thought was really impressive to be able to handle that the way he did, and then to loss with the grace that he did. And I understand that hype, whatever you want to call it, can be annoying to fans, and maybe the likes of Lerner did not get as much spotlight for what he did beating Medvedev as he would have done if Fonseca fever was not rife. But I really don't think that was a poor showing at all from Fonseca, and he's got a lot to build on there throughout the course of the rest of the season. The hype happens because there's stuff to go off most of the time. It doesn't just come out of the blue because someone's particular liking to a particular player. He was world number 1 in juniors, Fonseca. It's not like he's come from nowhere. So, yeah, I think that the talk about him is warranted. And whether it's in the near future or further down the line, he is coming, and we're ready to see how it unfolds.
There's an excitement factor to hype too. Let's just be honest. Like, if a player plays a certain way, has some shot making ability, there's part of the reason why we like what we see. And when you see Fonseca hit a forehand, you understand pretty quickly why there's a lot of hype. That said, one of the other last things here with Abigail Johnson. Thoughts on this week? You're calling the action for Tennis Channel. Linz is a 500 with Mukova. We got Sakari, Yastremska tomorrow, Alexandrova. There's a stacked field there. The ATP had a nice tribute in Montpellier to Richard Gasquet against Griekspoor. Heard you on the Felix Auger-Aliassime Arthur Cazot match. So there's a lot of talent in Montpellier too. But what can you tell us about the action this week?
It's great this week where you've got the 3 tour level indoor events. It doesn't always happen that all the tennis is happening specifically in those conditions. A lot of the players competing didn't make long, deep runs at the Australian Open, so it's not like they're playing catch up for recovery time and all of that jazz coming into these events. So you know what you're working with. I think you can take things from what's happening this week into the long term in terms of how it's going to develop for these players further down the line. I think Felix Auger-Aliassime is on his way back, and he never fully left. Don't get me wrong. He never left the realm of the top 40, but this is a guy who's been ranked inside the top 10. And just doing research ahead of calling for his matches, you see that when he has a boost at the beginning of the season, whether it's a title run or a final run or a deep run at a big tournament, he then goes on and performs throughout the year. He didn't have that last season. He he's already won Adelaide this year, and now he's back in conditions that have always served him well. He loves the indoors, so I'm going to be very interested to see how he progresses. Alexander Bublik is twice a champion there in Montpellier.
Yeah.
The craziest matches to call, because when you're commentating, you're looking for rhythm and for key points that are going to make the difference, and that guy is going to do what he's going to do. He is the walking roller coaster of the ATP Tour, Bublik. So yeah, interesting talking points there. And I thought a really great effort from Gasquet in what was always going to be his last tournament at a venue where he's been the most successful and experienced over the years. 13 appearances, 3 titles, 6 finals. Big from him to test someone of the form and ability of Talon Griekspoor. Karolina Mukova, we've spoken about her long-term potential, so whether she can shoulder the top seed tag is a good storyline for Linz, which has had some upsets. Elena Svitolina lost to Anna Blinkova. There have been other seeded departures. And then Singapore is very open. It's the 250, so of the 3 tournaments, it just feels like the most opportune events of the 3 tour level events that are taking place this week. So storylines everywhere, as per usual on the tennis tour.
Well, Abigail, this has been fun. I did have one last question for you here on the Inside in Tennis podcast. And the question is, are you going to take time out of your very busy schedule to spend with Jack Draper to explain to him how money works?
To explain to him how money works?
Because that was the quote. He said, money, I'm not really sure. I want to learn more about that this year.
Okay. I've spent way too much time with Jack Draper recently because I was commentating for BBC 5 Live at the Australian Open. And of course, he had all these 5-setters and he was finishing at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And a couple of times I had to stay afterwards to do the interview with him. So, I have seen a fair amount of Jack in recent times. And I think he's taken enough of my time.
Okay. Well, hopefully he can figure out. Hopefully he figures out the answer to his question sooner rather than later, because the tennis has looked pretty good. Abigail Johnson, it's always been a pleasure. We appreciate you on this show so much. Thanks for coming on the Inside in Tennis podcast. You're always welcome. And, enjoy Southern California yet again. You've earned a nice little, time to experience the SoCal weather. So enjoy it.
Thanks, Mitch. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was Abigail Johnson. This is the Inside in Tennis podcast. We're available on all your platforms. Go to Apple, go to iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your shows. Subscribe, leave a nice rating or a review. And we're back in a few days to talk more tennis. All the video episodes of the Inside in Tennis podcast are part of the Believe Network as well. On YouTube, go to my channel, Mitch Michals, to subscribe to episodes there. For Abigail Johnson, I'm Mitch Michals. This was the Inside in Tennis podcast. We'll see you soon.